scientist and author Dr. Peter Hotez to the show to talk about the latest in vaccines, health policies, and taking your calls. I'm Ernie Manous.
And I'm Celeste Diaz-Sherman. More than 60 immigrants have opted into the Trump administration's Project Homecoming and have self-deported from Houston on Monday.
And I'm Frank Billingsley. We'll also discuss the case of a pregnant Georgia woman who, even after being declared brain dead, has been on life support for 3 months due to the state's strict anti-abortion law.
And as Ernie, Frank, and I discuss the top headlines of the day, we want your thoughts, your questions, and concerns. Give us a call or shoot us a text at 713-440-8870 or email us at talk@hellohouston.org.
Hello Houston is made possible in part by founding sponsors John Bradshaw and Kathy Sanders, and by gifts from listeners like you.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Freedom Caucus Chairman Andy Harris says there is no way President Trump's massive budget bill passes the House today. He told Newsmax this morning, quote, "This bill actually got worse overnight." He and fellow conservative Congressman Chip Roy are demanding more spending cuts to keep the debt from spiraling higher.
We as members are at the table. We don't want the deal to be ended. This is an arbitrary deadline. If today comes and goes, it doesn't mean that this possibility to make sure that taxes stay low and that we fix America's healthcare system and fix America's energy system, it doesn't mean that prospect is off the table.
The Congressional Budget Office recently issued an analysis that projects President Trump's tax policies will add $3.8 trillion to the national debt. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is back on Capitol Hill facing questions about budget cuts and the dismantlement of the U.S. Agency for International Development. And he's getting a lot of pushback from Democrats. More from NPR's Michelle Kellerman.
The ranking Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee says this is not the Rubio he once knew as a longtime Florida senator who often talked about democracy and human rights.
Secretary Rubio is doing precisely what Senator Rubio feared, withholding congressional appropriated funds, stonewalling oversight, and acting as if laws passed by this body are optional.
Rubio is defending his record, saying he's reviewed all aid to make sure it aligns with the Trump administration's America First policy. He says he's folding what remains of USAID into the State Department. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the State Department.
The Federal Emergency Management Agency is on the ground in St. Louis to survey tornado damage. St. Louis Public Radio's Hiba Ahmed reports city officials have shared more details about last Friday's storm.
St. Louis Mayor Kara Spencer said the tornado siren system failed to warn residents to take shelter.
There was a failure, a human failure, a failure in protocol to get the sirens up and running, to let the community know that there was a massive weather event hitting our community.
The tornado, which had wind speeds of up to 150 miles per hour and stretched at least a mile wide, tore through residential areas, leaving homes and local businesses in rubble. Missouri Governor Mike Kehoe says after FEMA completes its survey, he will ask for a major disaster declaration from President Donald Trump, which would open up federal assistance. For NPR News, I'm Hiba Ahmed in St. Louis.
U.S. stocks are mixed this hour. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 335 points, more than 0.75% at 42,341. The S&P is down 8 points. The Nasdaq has risen 79 points. From Washington, this is NPR News.
Live from News 88.7 in Houston, I'm Gabrielle Dawkins. Lawyers for the federal government are asking a Texas judge for more time to track down a Venezuelan man who is believed to be deported to El Salvador. Houston Public Media's Sarah Grunow reports.
24-year-old Widmer Ahelvis Sanguino followed a rigorous refugee system process to get into the United States. But when he arrived to the Bush Intercontinental Airport in Houston, his attorney says he was immediately flagged for his tattoos.
The tattoos were a collection of things that were important to him. The rose was a reminder of a family garden. The owl was an animal that actually would visit him on many nights and then would land in front of his window in his house.
His family learned from a CBS article that he was then deported to El Salvador. The United States government was given until Tuesday afternoon to track him down and Wednesday afternoon to facilitate attorney-client communications. I'm Sarah Grunow, News 88.7.
With the recent changes made to the EPA, what does that mean for the Energy Star program? It's a decades-long effort that helps consumers identify energy-efficient products. Johanna Newman with the Environment America Research and Policy Center shared her thoughts on Hello Houston.
Having EPA's stamp of approval on the certification process and having someone there periodically do compliance checks helps preserve the integrity of the brand. And without kind of the full force of the government behind it, it's a lot harder to keep bad actors from slapping the label on their products and getting away with it.
Newman says if the program is privatized, it could erode public confidence in the Energy Star brand. And in sports, the Astros lost yesterday to the Tampa Bay Rays, 3-2, the final in that one. Houston is currently 2.5 games behind the Seattle Mariners for the first place in their division. They have 25 wins and 23 losses so far this year. I'm Gabrielle Dawkins, News 88.7.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Fisher Investments. Fisher's dedicated team of specialists provide resources on investing, retirement income, estate planning, and more. Learn more at FisherInvestments.com. Investing in securities involves the risk of loss.
Live from the University of Houston, it's Hello Houston, an open forum on today's biggest stories affecting Houston and beyond. Call now, 713-440-8870, or let us know your thoughts on today's topics by emailing us at talk@hellohouston.org. Now here's your host for Hello Houston, Ernie Manous, Celeste Diaz-Sherman, and Frank Billingsley.
Hello, Hump Day.
It's Wednesday.
Some of us Friday.
It's Friday.
I was going
for
to say
a few
it's
of
the
us.
middle of the week, but not for my two compatriots here. You guys are taking off the next 2 days.
I am. I'm heading to Colorado for my niece's graduation.
You
high
deserve
school.
it. You deserve it. Mothers of two deserve every break they can
Yeah,
get.
but she's taking the two with her, aren't you?
I am taking the two with me, and one of them did not let me sleep last night, but we're going to keep her.
And Frank, you're taking off too. You're going.
Yes, we're going to go down to Puerto Vallarta.
And you were kept up by one of your little ones.
I know, my fur baby. You know, we woke up yesterday morning at 4 a.m, and his back left leg was paralyzed. And he's only 3 and very active. And so that was 3 hours at the vet hospital. See if he got better. He didn't. Took him to the vet. Vet said it's neurological. Take him to Gulf Coast Vets. They're the only neurologists around. So we were there all night. But, I mean, it's better news. It looks like it's not going to be a spinal surgery.
Oh, good.
And maybe physical therapy and an infection. Anyway, to go into it, I hate it when my dogs are so helpless.
Yeah.
I cried all night.
We love our pets.
Same.
Yeah.
And so with both of you gone, they're going to allow me to sit in this chair. I'm going to have a guest host tomorrow, and then
But
we'll see
you've
what
been
happens.
here so long, Ernie.
What could you be
Yes.
reacting to?
What an anniversary.
It is my 29th
Woo!
anniversary here at Houston Public Media. I came here when it was Houston PBS in 1996. I was 4.
I was 10.
We're all lying about our ages. But yeah, and it has been
I was 10.
an incredible journey here. And I want to thank all of you because you folks have stood by me through all this from television. We've done a whole bunch of different shows. Frank, you have guested on so many of my shows. And now the joy to get to sit here and work with you every day is truly a treat.
Houston's a better place because of you.
Absolutely.
Oh,
And certainly this station is. But I think what you've done for Houston in the last 29 years is commendable. So
well,
I'm
it keeps
happy to be
getting
working
better
with you.
because they keep building better teams, and this team so far is the best of them all.
Well,
Celeste, Frank, thank
we
you.
only have room for one statue out front, Ernie, and it's going to be yours.
All right, well, as we get ready to build that statue, let's get on with the show. But before we do, Frank, I got a bone to pick with you.
Uh-oh, that
weather
thunderstorm
last night.
We came out of the Gulf Coast Veterinary Hospital, and the lightning and the thunder, and we're crying, and it's like, oh my God, it's crying. That's us crying.
God's tears were there with you. How's it going to be the rest of the weekend? Anything?
Oh, you know what? No rain today, but it's going to be a little dicey as we get into Memorial Day, and that rain chance now for Memorial Day has gone up to 50%. Remember yesterday it was 40?
Yeah.
Now it's 50.
All right.
So
Coming Coming up this hour, we're going to be talking with Dr. Peter Hotez. If you've been following the news, information came out yesterday from the FDA about changing exactly how you can get your COVID vaccine, who can get the COVID vaccine. We'll find out what the real story is behind that, and we'll be taking all your calls, comments, and questions, texts for Dr. Hotez, 713-440-8870, or you can send us an email at talk@hellohouston.org. But as always, Celeste, lead us off with the top stories of the day.
Thanks, Ernie. Coming out of Austin, the House is slated to vote on a bill to clarify Texas's near total abortion ban on Wednesday. After it passed the Senate unanimously last month, the bill is expected to garner bipartisan support despite some concerns from both sides of the aisle. Senate Bill 31, also called the Life of the Mother Act, does not expand the exceptions or restore abortion access. It instead aims to clarify when a doctor can terminate a pregnancy under the existing exemptions by aligning language between the state's abortion laws, codifying court rulings, and requiring education for doctors and lawyers on the nuances of the law. In the Senate, Republicans threw their support behind the bill, while Democrats push back on its narrowness, noting that Texas law still does not allow abortions in cases of rape, incest, or lethal fetal anomalies. Joining us now is Texas State Senator Molly Cook. Senator, welcome to Hello Houston.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be with y'all this morning.
Senator Cook, would you consider this a win or a step in the right direction for women's reproductive rights here in Texas?
It's a complicated question with a complicated answer. And as I said on the Senate floor, I voted yes on SB 31 because I do believe it will save lives. Some of the things included in it are clarifying when a doctor can actually take action. So you don't have to wait until death is imminent under this bill. Of course, we don't know exactly how it's going to play out in operating rooms or exam rooms across the state until it's passed and implemented. But it's also important to note, as you mentioned, what's not in it. And what's not in it is exceptions for rape, for incest, or for fatal fetal anomalies, which are a very difficult situation for both the mother and the caretakers in the hospital. And then also what isn't in it is the freedom for doctors to practice medicine in this state.
Ma'am, this is Frank Billingsley. Tell me, what is a fatal fetal anomaly? And I understand you're a former ER nurse, right?
I am a current ER nurse.
Oh, you're a current ER nurse, so you're even better. So you know exactly what you're talking about. I don't know what a fatal fetal. Just explain that, please.
Lethal fetal anomaly.
Right. And I think the biggest thing to note is just what a big category this is and how each situation is completely unique. And that's why it's so important for doctors and mothers or pregnant Texans to be able to have that privacy and freedom. But one example would be a fetus is encephalic, which basically means there's no brain, there's no head. Right. This fetus will not survive after birth for any lengthy amount of time. And some people will choose to go ahead and carry to term and to have the baby and to grieve and heal in their own process. And of course, some folks would rather get an abortion and not have to carry a pregnancy to term that's never going to be viable, that's never going to be a living child.
And this doesn't allow them to do that, right? They don't have that choice.
Right. Exactly. So you still have to seek care out of state.
A quick clarification in here. So what specifically, verbiage-wise, are doctors allowed to do? Because I guess it's the ambiguity in so many laws that cause so many problems for us. What does this one say?
The hopes from the author and all of us who voted yes on the bill is that basically by clarifying that death does not have to be imminent, that doctors will be able to act sooner and we will prevent some of the really tragic outcomes that caused infertility, caused death of the mother, some of those big headlines that we've all been reading about.
So is it solely the doctor's decision whether or not the mother's life is at risk?
As written and as stated in the intent of the author, that is correct. It's up to the doctor to practice their best reasonable judgment.
So then with a law like that, could they be sued and could they be questioned on their judgment? Or is the bill written so it is their judgment is the judgment?
That's a great question. And again, the intent of the author is spoken on the
Not
floor.
Intent.
Is that this
what does it actually say?
would be an affirmative defense. I just think it's important to also zoom out and look at some of the other bills, some of which were by the same author, that were heard even on the same day on the Senate floor, that leaned into prosecuting folks or civilly, going after folks who are trying to support women who are getting abortions. And so the reason I'm saying intent is because we don't know exactly how these words will play out in exam rooms, in operating rooms. I have a lot of fear about there still being a chilling effect because abortions are banned in such an extreme way in Texas.
Senator Cook, you were quoted in the Texas Tribune for saying the folks who are working on this fix are, from my perspective, the folks who have created the problem. Over the past 4 years, we've watched women suffer and die, and this bill is the confirmation that we all agree something is broken in Texas. Senator Cook, do you think SB 31 is enough to fix what is broken in Texas? What do you think needs to happen? And do you at least think this is a step in the right direction for women's reproductive rights?
I do think it's absolutely a step in the right direction. Hospitals and doctors asked us for this language. They believe it will save lives, and I do too. The only thing that will restore the full spectrum of reproductive health care that's data-driven and evidence-based is repealing the total abortion ban. And that is what Texans have been fighting for. That's what Democrats are fighting for women in Texas to be able to carry pregnancy safely.
I have a very sensitive question. And I have known women that have been raped, and I've known women that have been victims of incest, and my heart goes out to anyone. But I want to ask you this. If a woman presents and says, I need an abortion because I was raped, you don't really know if that's true. And the same with incest. My brother did this to me, and I need an abortion. And the fact is, no, that didn't happen. I just want an abortion. So I appreciate the rape and incest if it's really happening. But how do you determine if it's a lie or not? I think that's where it gets really messy.
It does get really messy. And there's, of course, forensic evidence that you can examine that people use to charge people or convict people of these kinds of sexual assault, of incest. But that is why people need the privacy to talk to their own doctors and deal with this on personal, private terms, and why it shouldn't be up to sweeping state policy to get in between doctors and their patients in these really, really tough situations.
Yeah, it is. It is. I think that any excuse can be used. I think one of the hardest parts, of course, is when the mother's life is at risk. And you're an ER nurse. How is that determined? And what does a doctor see going on and says, this woman needs an abortion or she might die?
So there's all kinds of early indicators of things like, hemorrhage or sepsis or those things that we've seen top lines for. The one thing that really came through in comments in both the House and the Senate Siding Committee is that each situation is totally unique. And doctors are trained to be able to understand these situations. They've seen hundreds of cases before, and so their judgment is rooted in excellent education, in clinical expertise. And so that's why they need to be able to make these decisions, sometimes split-second decisions, without having to think, do I need to call a lawyer? Do I need to call an ethics board? Or can I just treat the patient in front of me?
Yeah.
You're listening to Hello Houston. Joining us now is State Senator Molly Cook. You can join the conversation at 713-440-8870. Now, Senator Cook, I want to go back to that original question regarding SB 31, about if you think that this is enough to fix it. You mentioned that there needs to be appeals to the current law. Is SB 31 considered a type of appeal, and what are some of the appeals to this law that you think need to be made?
So what I think ultimately needs to happen is a repealing the total extreme abortion ban. But I think this is a great question, and is this a win? And one of the most important things to look at that may not be totally obvious if you're reading the news is that SB 33 is a bill that prohibits localities from supporting women who are seeking abortions out of state, not paying for the procedure, but perhaps providing money for childcare while a woman leaves the state to seek care. And then SB 2880 is another bounty hunter bill, if you will, that allows anybody in the state to go and sue if they think that a woman has taken a medication for abortion, even if they took it outside the state. It's a de facto travel ban. pretty clearly listed in the language of the bill. And so as we consider SB 31, we cannot leave out that Republicans are also carrying SB 33 and 2880. So even as we all acknowledge that this abortion ban has killed Texas women, they continue to lean into the extremist abortion ban, continue to expand it, even while they work on this medical clarification language. It gives me some cognitive dissonance.
For clarification, as of today, right now, what is the current law in Texas?
We have one of the most extreme, if not the most extreme, abortion ban in Texas. There is no, you cannot seek an abortion in this state for anything that is not medically necessary. And in the opinion of hospitals and doctors right now, medically necessary is poorly defined.
From fertilization on, or is there a certain period? Nothing, it's just a total ban.
So you mentioned the law that says you could be in big trouble if you sell a Plan B pill. And we talked about this
We've talked about
on
multiple
our
of these
broadcast.
bills.
And afterward we said, well, what about a condom? I mean, isn't a condom designed to prevent a pregnancy, just like a Plan B the next day? You don't know if you're pregnant or not. You're just taking it in case. You don't know if you would get a woman pregnant or not. You're just wearing a condom to make sure you don't. How is that different? Or are we just splitting hairs here?
That's what we end up doing every time is walking down this road of what if, well, how does this relate? And some of the questions are interesting philosophical discussions, but they turn into real consequences for people's lives, which I think is why, the fall of Roe has kind of reopened this whole conversation, right? We had something in place that protected privacy up to 20 weeks, that protected the freedom of physicians to practice medicine, and now that's gone. And so we're relitigating every single moment of this. And in Texas, the only thing that we know for sure is that a total abortion ban costs lives. The rest of it is interesting, it's semantic, but I'm a nurse, so I want to see lives getting saved.
I am assuming that when you talk to your colleagues, Republican colleagues on this, that their goal is not to harm women. They believe in the sanctity of life, and that's what they're fighting for. When confronted with the stories of how many women have been harmed, how do they react to that? When you're having discussions about this and what the legislation or the laws actually say and where we should improve, what is their stance on this?
And most of the discussion has taken place, publicly on the Senate floor. And I always encourage folks, go back and watch these discussions. There is so much interesting debate. You learn a lot. You kind of see how people think, and that's just invaluable when you're advocating for policy in Texas. Ultimately, I think that it comes down to, do you believe that the life of the fetus is completely, from conception, should be exactly the same as a fully born baby? That is the discussion. And so, some folks will say on the record that 30,000 Texans are killed a year by abortions. I don't agree with that. I don't view that the same way. And that's why it's so important that we have the freedom to practice our religious autonomy, to practice our, our own conscientious beliefs, to be able to practice medicine freely and be able to weigh out these ethical decision-making without the interference of state legislators who do not belong in our bathrooms or our bedrooms. This is something that needs to happen between a patient and a doctor in the exam room.
This is a fascinating discussion. I hope you'll come back as this continues. I noticed the Ann Richards book behind you. And, she was a great person in so many ways. And I appreciate that. I appreciate all you're doing to fight for women.
Thank you. And I'll just close by saying I appreciate the public, Democrats and Republicans, who have shared their stories so bravely about what happens under these extremist abortion bans. They're the reason SB 31 was heard on the Senate floor, and that we're even taking steps in the right direction in the first place. So thank you to everybody who's advocated.
Senator Molly Cook, thank you for joining us today on Hello Houston.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll talk with professor, vaccine scientist, and author Dr. Peter Hotez about the latest in the vaccine protocols. And we will continue to take your calls at 713-440-8870. This is Hello Houston on News 88.7.
On the next Fresh Air, What happens when artificial intelligence quietly reshapes our lives? New York Times reporter Kashmir Hill explains the real-world impact of AI, from classrooms to our everyday decisions, and how our relationship with AI could define the future of privacy and human connection. Join us.
You can hear Fresh Air. It's coming up tonight at 8 p.m.
I'm Matt Hara, morning anchor here at Houston Public Media. We're the type of media outlet that doesn't answer to anybody but our community because we're a community-funded station. And that means we really are in a unique position to listen to our audience, try to cover what we think our audience cares about, since you tell us. We have talented, hungry journalists here who have a desire to get to the deeper story, have in-depth conversations. And, that's why we can deliver both daily news and feature stories for our audience.
Imagine two friends getting together.
So what's happening in Congress?
Well, this is something that is going to be tough to defend in an election year. And that's assuming it even passes, which it might not.
Imagine you could listen in.
And then what about the Senate? The bills are just rocketing out of the chamber.
Have they gone too far? The House might say, well, wait a minute.
Well, you can. Party Politics with Brandon Rottinghouse and Geronimo Cortina. Fridays at 7:30 p.m. on News 88.7, at 8 on TV8, and on your favorite podcast platforms.
Support comes from electricityplans.com, helping Houstonians find electricity plans based on home energy usage, with tools to compare rates. Enrollment details and more at electricityplans.com.
Houston Public Media brings to you PBS World. Experience the personal connection behind the headlines, with programming devoted to telling stories that humanize complex issues. PBS World on TV 8.6 and online at houstonpublicmedia.org.
And now back to Hello Houston. To comment on any of today's topics, call 713-440-8870 or email us at talk@hellohouston.org. Now back to Ernie Manous, Celeste Diaz-Sherman, and Frank Billingsley.
With headlines that read, the FDA may limit future COVID shots and only be giving them to older people and those at serious risk of infection, you may feel as if our National Health Initiative is in fact limiting preventative measures for underserved communities. To better understand what is happening with preventative health care in this country, as well as people's understanding of vaccines and how they work, we invited Dr. Peter Hotez to the program. Hotez is a pediatrician, scientist, author, and advocate in the field of global health, vaccinology, and tropical disease control. A busy man, he also holds the position of Dean at the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, in addition to co-director of the Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development. Got all that out. Good morning, Dr. Hotez.
Glad you got it all in, Ernie. Sorry, we're out of time now.
Yeah, I know. How do we have time to talk to you? I guess the place to start is the announcement we saw yesterday from the FDA. I guess it's questioning who should be getting vaccinated and what they will support moving forward. Help us understand what they actually said and what it actually means at this point.
So one part makes sense to me. The other part's a bit of a head scratcher. So the part that makes sense to me is, based on case fatality rates and hospitalization rates, sort of the acute phase of COVID, they are recommending an annual update to be determined in terms of the exact composition. We could talk about that for those over the age of 65, people like me, and those with underlying health conditions. And the list is provided. And they did it sort of out of the box, but kind of interesting. They did it as an editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine rather than as a FDA guidance document. But fine. I mean, that part makes all that is okay. The part that I disagreed with was that they appeared not to consider other long-term consequences. And what do I mean by that? Well, what they did was they are now not allowing people under the age of 65 to get vaccinated, unless you have underlying.
Are they not allowing them, or are they not paying for it?
They're not. It sounds to me the document, and I guess the pharmacies will agree with it. Interestingly, they bypassed the CDC for it. So usually the FDA will sign off on a product and say it's safe and effective, But then it's up to the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices of the CDC to then detail how it's actually going to be used. They jumped over all of that and basically provided that guidance. And what they said was, we're not going to make this vaccine available for those under the age of 65 unless the drug companies repeat all of the clinical trials all over again for this updated variant, which is too expensive, right? I mean, and it would be a massive study because by now so many people have been either naturally infected or vaccinated or both, some combination of it would be a massive study and prohibitively expensive. So, and I'll tell you the concerns I have about not making it available for those under the age of 65.
My initial reaction, though, is that you want to protect your older population. One way to protect them is you vaccinate the full community because then there's less spread of the illness, the disease. Therefore, that also protects the people of older age. If you're only giving it to the over 65 and those at high risk, you do run a risk of COVID running rampant and then coming back toward that same group you're trying to protect.
So we're in Vulcan mind meld mode.
Okay, we're agreeing.
Yeah,
Okay.
we totally agree. And so the first thing I got were all these direct messages I got some direct messages and emails saying, "Hey doc, I'm 40 to 50 years old. I'm not going to be eligible now, and I'm worried about passing the virus on to my aging parents."
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, Dr. Hotez. So does that mean, I understand there's going to be a vaccine, a new one coming out in September. If my husband and I, we are within the 30 to 40 age group, want to go to our local Walmart like we have before, can we still do that?
Not
Walmart, Walgreens.
Not unless you make the case that you've got one of the risk factors, and it's a pretty big laundry list of risk factors that's in the New England Journal of Medicine paper. And we'll talk about a couple of those in a minute. But the other concern I have, other than transmitting the virus to, because these vaccines do, contrary to what you hear from the anti-vaccine activists, there is reduction in virus transmission if you're vaccinated because the level of virus neutralizing antibody is so high that it gets into the nose and throat washings and it limits virus excretion. It does do that. Not as well as we'd like, but it does do that.
So it helps you, and it helps you not to pass it on.
It helps your community. That's right. Really quickly, I want to remind folks the phone number here if you want to call and ask questions, 713-440-8870 to talk to Dr. Hotez. Continue.
But the other reason that, one of the reasons I'm so eager to get the annual immunization when it's made available is because if you keep up with your annual immunizations and boosters, you're less likely to get long COVID. Neurologic sequelae, heart sequelae. This is a thromboembolic virus. What do we know
now about long COVID? I remember all through the early years when we would talk all the time about this, we were still finding out more and more. It's been a good clip of time now. What is long COVID and what do we know about
long COVID is prolonged symptoms, and there's a whole list of criteria in terms of neurologic complications, heart complications, respiratory and neuromuscular complications. And the underlying reasons for it are still controversial. For instance, there's a controversy whether it's due to persistence of the virus in the body or whether it's due to an overreaction of the immune system to the virus and whether you're getting especially autoimmune responses in the brain. But the point is there's now really good data to show that if you keep up with your vaccinations, you're less likely to get long COVID, even in kids. And there was a study recently published from the University of Pennsylvania.
If you get COVID and you don't get sick, but you've been infected and you get through it relatively quickly, are you still at risk of long COVID?
If you're not vaccinated, you're at higher risk.
So
I want to ask a quick question. So there was all this talk about a combination flu COVID vaccine where you would just get one shot and they would be combined. Has that been abandoned? That idea?
That's still on the table. I know Moderna is pursuing a combo flu and COVID vaccine. I don't know exactly what the status is at this point, but we'll see if that gets on the table.
Well, it's so hard
as well.
for people to get the flu vaccine, and that kills a lot of people. As you
Absolutely,
know,
absolutely.
it's hard to get
The
people,
flu, not the vaccine.
The flu, but the flu. But getting them to the table to get the flu vaccine was hard enough. Getting them to get, and now I just think it's going to be more difficult if you say, well, but you can come for the flu, but you don't get the COVID. Sorry.
Yeah, and then there's a third piece that sort of gets me a little bit upset. This regime, this new Department of Health and Human Services, they're always flying this banner of health freedom, medical freedom. Mm-hmm. We're not going to insert the government into your life, this libertarian philosophy. And okay, there may be parts I agree and don't agree with, but this. Now they've basically taken your decision whether or not you want to get vaccinated. Well, it was a decision between you and your healthcare provider and physician, and they've put it in the hands of the government. It's so hypocritical, right?
Agreed.
Dr. Hotez, I do want to go back to long COVID because last year I got COVID 3 or 4 times, and every single time it got worse. I'm a runner. I'm very healthy. Now, I'm also going to just put myself out there. I did receive the original first vaccines. But as somebody who I am on Instagram, I'm on my phone, I started to get really scared about vaccines because there is a group of people within my age that have young children, and it is a real concern that my concern was I'm getting COVID often. I took Paxlovid the 3rd time. And then a few weeks later, I got it again, and it was COVID was really bad on me.
That's a common experience, by the way. So if you get repeated bouts of COVID, anybody can get long COVID after a case of COVID. It's more likely if you've had repeated bouts of COVID or if you've had a severe case of COVID.
So
that's the reason.
Should I be getting the vaccine even though I've had it multiple times?
Yeah. Now, I guess one question is, after you had your first 2 immunizations way back in 2021, did you get boosters regularly?
I got 1 booster, and then after that, I stopped getting them.
Yeah, so that's the reason why you keep up with the booster. The disappointment with the mRNA vaccine. By the way, we made a different vaccine, a low-cost recombinant protein vaccine for India and Indonesia. Every vaccine has advantages and disadvantages. The nice thing about mRNA is it's quick to make, and you can move vaccinate populations quickly. The one disadvantage of the mRNA technology, in my view, is its durability. So that you wind up having to get vaccinated every 6 months, which is a real pain.
Well, it's funny because now I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to because now I'm petrified of long COVID. I am absolutely petrified of it.
In my view, you should get the immunization. Now, the good news in this,
give me some.
If you look at the list, if you look at that list that they put out in the New England Journal of Medicine,
we can all find
it's
something
a really
in there.
long list.
We're all on it.
And it even says something like low physical activity. So
I'm in.
So so I don't know. I certainly don't want to give advice on how to skirt the rules, but it seems to me that if you're on Sunday afternoon, if you want to watch both the Cowboys and the Texans, that's a long afternoon of not.
Would Celeste qualify simply because she's had 3 cases of COVID in 1 year?
I don't know if that would be a criterion.
Why wouldn't it be?
It's certainly if you're immunocompromised.
It sounds like she is.
Well, that would be a decision she makes between
as
your
we learn more.
I'm going to take Frank to the pharmacy.
The other confusing aspect is who makes the decision whether you're on that list of criteria?
Well, that's what I was going to ask.
Is it self-reporting and you tell your pharmacist, or does it require a letter
Can a doctor
from
say,
the physician?
I believe my patient qualifies for this vaccine?
Certainly,
and that's all
if
they
your
need?
doctor's willing to do. The question is that. But all of these things are barriers to access, and
right.
I have prostate cancer.
I'm a big believer in making it easy.
I've always gotten it early because of my previous history with prostate cancer. But the pharmacies never said prove it.
Right.
Prove to me that you have prostate cancer.
So one of the unknowns after this guidance document is who makes the decision now on whether you.
We are talking with Dr. Peter Hotez, taking your questions, comments, thoughts. You can email us at talk@hellohouston.org, or you can call us and text us, 713-440-8870. We got an email comment in from Bob. Bob says, Peter, You're a gift to Houston. Your calm, experienced voice speaking truth to conspiracy theories is powerful and necessary. We should all thank you for your courage in the face of a tsunami of disinformation. Keep up the great work.
Oh, that made my day. Thank you so much.
We have a call.
I'm going to print it out and send it to all my bosses.
I know, right? Your Christmas card.
People. Yeah.
Yes, and we have a call from Carol from Montrose. Carol, what is your question or comment for Dr. Hotez?
Well, I do agree that Dr. Hotez is a gift to Houston and to our country. And I have taken Pfizer boosters regularly. And a few weeks ago, since I'd gotten one of those, you are of a certain age and you should get another booster, after I went and had a COVID test because I'd been around so many people and it was negative, I went ahead and had the booster. I will tell you, it was the worst experience I've ever had.
When you say worst experience, what do you mean?
Well, I'm going to go through my symptoms.
Okay, bring
know.
them to us quickly.
30-minute show here.
Yeah. We won't go through that because I wrote them down so I could tell you. And really bad cough with deep phlegm. I was sleepy. I was sleeping 16 hours a day. I was so tired.
Now, when did you have your COVID?
I've never had COVID.
So the doctor couldn't hear you the beginning of your question. Let me just recap it. That she got the Pfizer booster a few weeks ago. She thought she may have had COVID. She took a test. She was negative, so she ended up getting a booster.
And then had
and then how long after you got the booster did you have your symptoms?
2 days.
So
2 days after that.
You know, now one possibility, unfortunately, is it can take a couple of weeks for the booster to kick in. So what possibly could have happened is in between the time you got the booster and the immune response kicks in, you could have gotten some intercurrent viral infection, such as COVID or flu or a gazillion other things. So sometimes it's hard to know what's ascribed to a side effect of the vaccine versus some other intercurrent illness.
And let's talk about that. I want to thank you, Carol, for your call, but let's talk about those side effects. A lot of people believe if you get vaccinated, you can get it. They talk about this with the flu. I got the flu vaccine, but then I got the flu. It gave it to me. Explain the logic behind that or lack thereof.
Well, you know, the flu vaccine, because it's not always a perfect match between, because it's a bit of an art to predict what's going to be the circulating flu strain that year. So it could be that there's an imperfect match. So on average, the flu vaccine protects about 40%.
But the vaccine cannot give you the illness.
The vaccine will not give you the illness.
Same thing with COVID vaccine.
That's right.
Can I touch on the shingles vaccine? I know we have a call holding, because I got the shingles vaccine. In fact, I got the early one. I got the next ones too. They're the one thing that really kicked my butt.
Yeah, me too.
Why is that? Why is that?
Because it's the Shingrix vaccine from GlaxoSmithKline. It's a recombinant protein vaccine, and we make recombinant protein vaccines, and you need powerful immunostimulants, adjuvants, to really get a strong antibody response to those recombinant proteins. And the GSK's vaccine system is called AS01, and it's got lots of toll-like receptor agonists, and it really does a job.
I was exhausted.
Some people are fine with it.
Really?
With me, it gave me a pretty.
Well, you should
pretty
still
better.
get it if you're over 50.
But you don't want to get shingles. And by the way, there's a new finding which is a puzzler, but it's exciting. Shingrix. If you get Shingrix, you're less likely to get Alzheimer's.
I saw that.
Wow.
I'm going to get some right now.
And so it's really interesting. The question is, what's the mechanism there?
I know, right?
Does the varicella zoster virus have a role in Alzheimer's? Is there what's the mechanism?
Our number here is 713-440-8870. Jerry is on the line from Midtown. Jerry, what's your question?
Hi, good morning, all. I do have a question for the doctor, just sort of on the general nature of disease in general. I mean, I think, until a few years ago, until COVID, really, all diseases seem to be defined by their symptoms, right? I mean, if you had the flu, you identified the flu because there were recognizable symptoms, right? The chickenpox has recognizable symptoms. I mean, all kinds of different diseases have this is how we know what a disease is, or at least this is how we used to know what a disease is. With COVID, maybe you don't have any symptoms. Some people lose their sense of smell and some people don't. Some people seem to, it just seems to be all over the map. And I'd like to know is there any other disease with this, inconsistency of symptoms?
Yeah, no, it's actually a very profound point, because this is what made COVID so problematic. So, for instance, there was a related virus. So the other name for COVID is SARS-2, Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome 2, SARS-2. The original SARS-1, emerged also out of China by the same mechanism in zoonotic spillover in 2002. That one, if you got it, you were really, really sick. Mm-hmm. And as a consequence, you were either going home or into the hospital, because it had a very high case fatality rate. And for that reason, if you had SARS-1, you weren't going to bars and restaurants and music concerts. That's why the epidemic didn't propagate. The problem with SARS-2 is that for everyone who was very sick, you had someone that was largely without symptoms, and they were going off to bars and concerts and spreading the virus around. And that's what made contact tracing just about impossible, and why this thing spread across the world as it did. That simple observation. And, different viruses have different obvious or less obvious presentation. Let me give you another example that's going to be relevant this summer. At the School of Tropical Medicine, we're watching the rise of all these mosquito-transmitted virus infections. Mm-hmm. Not only West Nile, but we're worried about dengue and chikungunya and Zika and maybe even potentially
I have a whole list to ask
yellow
you about.
fever and malaria. And guess what? They all present with fever, headache and rash, and what's called photophobia. So we're now actually we're doing this really cool project. We got supported by the Lyda Hill Foundation to actually create a climate health, because these are happening because of climate change and urbanization, a climate health early warning system where we know ahead of time what's in the mosquitoes, so that we can inform the ER physicians and let them know what's already out there. So, because otherwise you wait 2 weeks to send a specialty test off to our laboratory.
Quick point, just so people understand. People are still dying from COVID in this country. It is still a serious thing. We seem to take it as a nuisance. You get sick with it, or the problems with long COVID, but there are still fatalities at a good number.
Absolutely, and this is why I'm concerned about not making the vaccine available to anyone who
wants.
Well,
wouldn't you say, though, sorry, Dr. Hotez, but wouldn't you say there's still people that are dying of the flu? And the flu has been around for a long time, and we've had vaccines around the flu.
Yeah, but not enough people take vaccines. So we've had about 12,000 flu deaths so far, and that's early in the epidemic accounting, so it could be double. So it's going to be a bad flu season.
So, all right, this rule comes along. Nobody under 65 can take this COVID vaccine,
unless you have the risk factors.
Unless you have the risk factor, but let's say that this is a dumb idea, and all these people in their 30s, early 30s, and 40s and 50s get COVID and start spreading it among each other, and then to seniors that didn't get vaccinated for whatever reason. And we end up with this huge COVID epidemic again. Is that possible? And how long, if they say, okay, we were wrong, let's go back to vaccines, how long would it take to recover from that?
Yeah, that's why, don't mess with a good thing.
Right.
And by the way, even if they make it available to everyone, unfortunately, with all of the anti-vaccine disinformation out there, only about 25% of eligible Americans take it anyway. So, which is really unfortunate.
We have another call coming in at 713-440-8870. James from Westheimer. What's on your mind, James?
Hi, Ernie, and hi, Frank. And I apologize. What's the other co-host's name?
Celeste. She won't let you forget it.
That's my name. Don't wear it out.
Celeste. Okay. So I have a question for the doctor. Dr. Hotez, I am a 22-year-old male. The last time I remember having COVID, now that doesn't mean I didn't have it since then, but the last time I remember having COVID was around this time of year, summer, June, July of 2023. And I am not the healthiest for my age. I certainly fall under that category, physical inactivity. as published by the New England Journal of Medicine. But my question is, I like to visit with my elderly family often. Mm-hmm. And my question to you is, based off my current little synopsis of my health, age, gender, stuff like that, should I get the medicine now before it becomes harder to, or do you think it's not worthwhile for a person of my age?
I would say, given the fact that you're visiting elderly parents and you qualify because of a risk factor, yeah, go ahead and get the annual immunization when it's available this fall. I think the other question, though, is when did you last get your last immunization, and should you get something sooner? But definitely when it's available this fall, I would definitely do it.
Going back to I'll grab you in 1 minute, Celeste. I want to get to Rico from League City. What's your question for the doctor?
Within your general knowledge, now that they've edicted, COVID is not required for a certain age group, do you foresee this happening across all vaccines? Now, the flu vaccine is only going to be available for certain groups, and the MMR vaccine is only going to be available for certain groups, or within your wheelhouse, do you foresee that coming down?
Yeah, what's the trend?
Yeah, well, the trends are not great when you've got, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Health and Human Services Secretary, when he is probably the best known anti-vaccine activist, yes. And he's downplaying the severity of measles and, makes things up. Like he says, the 90 hospitalizations that we've had with kids in Texas is due to quarantine and isolation, and he says things like the MMR vaccine, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, is contaminated with aborted fetal material, or it's a leaky vaccine. I mean, every few days he comes out with a zinger. And, and I was complaining to my wife, Ann. I said, I was kind of hoping to get a break from all this media with COVID sort of winding down. And Mr. Kennedy seems determined to take me out of retirement and just keeps up with this crazy stuff.
I get the feeling people are going to have to die unnecessarily for people like Kennedy to say I was wrong.
Well, we've already had 2 measles deaths in Texas among 2 kids. School-age kids are completely healthy, and parents made the executive decision not to vaccinate them based on being flooded with disinformation.
Dr. Hotez, we do have a question from Megan in the Woodlands. She says, can Dr. Hotez clarify herd immunity?
So for the best example of herd immunity is for measles. So if a high enough percentage of people get immunized, and eventually that kind of stops the virus from propagating in the community, because the MMR vaccine is that good. The problem is the bar is pretty high. It requires 95% vaccine coverage in order to get that. And different pathogens have different set levels where herd immunity occurs, and you can actually do a calculation based on what's called the reproductive number of the infectious.
What's COVID's? How many of us need the COVID vaccine to create herd immunity?
Well, here is the problem with herd immunity with COVID is that the herd immunity assumes that there's no antigenic variation or shift in the pathogen, and that was the problem with COVID. So we never really got to true herd immunity because of COVID, because of all of the
a lot of people make that argument. Well, herd immunity.
Well, Dr. Hotez, I have a question. When it comes to COVID, people like myself that got it multiple times, I hear oftentimes people are like, well, your antibodies, where were your antibodies? Once you get it, your body has antibodies for 3 to 6 months. How does that work with people that continue to get it?
See, the problem, it's a particular problem with the newer variants. So if you remember, with the original lineage and the alpha variant, that virus was replicating deep in the tissues and a very, of course, high case fatality rate. But the level of protective immunity from infection was pretty high. The problem with these newer variants, what are sometimes called Omicron variants, they tend to replicate more in the upper airways, and the level of natural immunity is not nearly as high. So infection with one of these newer variants really doesn't give you much protection. That's why you're getting, just like when you can get colds all the time. It's the same kind of thing.
We were talking about herd immunity. We've talked about getting vaccinated. We've talked about and I don't know if in this conversation we have, but we're a global society now. With the cutting of funding to USAID, how does that impact not just COVID, but other illnesses that you see emerging around the globe?
Well, and unfortunately, three things are happening at once. They're gutting USAID, they're pulling out of support for the World Health Organization and the Gavi Alliance, Global Alliance of Vaccines and Immunization, and they're slashing budgets from the National Institutes of Health. And by the way, they're deliberately targeting the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases of the NIH. So if you look at the cuts so far, Bernie Sanders came out with a report last week, $500 million cuts already to the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. The next one down was like $60 million to mental health and heart, lung, and blood. So they're basically decimating our ability to do surveillance for infectious diseases.
Well, to that point,
so what it means is we're reduced ability to develop countermeasures such as new antiviral drugs and vaccines and diagnostics, and less ability to do surveillance for these illnesses that continually arise, and not having a seat at the table where global health decisions are being made in Geneva at the World Health Organization. So it weakens our biosecurity.
Do you think we'll ever have a vaccine for HIV?
There's a lot of exciting work. I mean, it's like what Churchill said about a certain country. It has great potential and it always will. But I do think, yes, we eventually could get there, but currently not with the budgets being slashed that we're seeing, though.
When we talk about what you were just talking about a moment ago with what's going on with funding and globally, are we going to see a resurgence, as we already have in some cases, of more of these things we thought were no longer a problem? Are we going to see us slipping back in what people are going to be getting infected with, the abilities to deal with it, the herd immunities going down? What is your prognosis for the future?
My worry, over the last 20 years, we've seen, one of the most common questions I'm asked is, hey, Doc, what the heck is going on? That's actually the question.
That's what I want to know.
And
my question is, are we going to be okay?
And so what do you really mean by that, with what the heck is going on? And the answer, and when you ask them, what they really mean is, why did we see SARS in 2002? Why did we see H1N1 in 2009? Ebola in 2014 that hit Dallas. That's when I went on Governor Rick Perry's task force and stayed on it with Governor Abbott. Then why did we get Zika in 2016? Then in 2019, Ebola again. Then COVID-19. Now we've got this thing called H5N1. And by the way, we're going to have a fourth major coronavirus, I predict, based on that regular cadence. And I give a whole lecture on this, and there's two big forces that are driving it. Shifting climate patterns, because a lot of these are viruses of bats, and as well as the mosquito-transmitted viruses, and urbanization.
Wow. Dr. Peter Hotez is a pediatrician, scientist, author, and advocate in the fields of global health, vaccinology, and tropical disease control. Dr. Hotez, thank you for joining us today on Hello Houston.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Coming up on Hello Houston, we'll learn more about a polytechnic college at Sam Houston State University and discuss drug price reductions. Stay with us for the second hour of Hello Houston.
Stay tuned. There's more Hello Houston on the way with Ernie Manous, Celeste Diaz-Sherman, and Frank Billingsley. For the latest in local news, subscribe to the Hello Houston daily newsletter at houstonpublicmedia.org. Hello Houston is a production of Houston Public Media. The opinions expressed by the guests of this program are solely their own and do not represent the views of management, staff, or underwriters of Houston Public Media. This is News 88.7.
Support comes from Chariot Energy, delivering a range of electricity options for Texas businesses, large and small, offering custom plans for large businesses and web portal access for the entrepreneurs. Details at chariotenergy.com. Support comes from Scan Health Plan, a not-for-profit Medicare Advantage plan that has been dedicated to the health and independence of their members since 1977. More information at scanhealthplan.com.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from UpReach Learning, presenting a summer academic boot camp for grades K through 8th to prepare for next year's math, reading, and writing curriculum. Camps begin June 2nd. Registration info at upreachlearning.org. Support comes from Rice University's Baker Institute, offering a forum for informed, nonpartisan, civic-minded engagement on the most pressing issues facing Texas, the U.S., and the world. More information about becoming a member is at bakerinstitute.org/membership.
It's going to be a mostly sunny day. We'll get up to about 90 today. And then tonight, partly cloudy with a low around 72. Currently, we have partly cloudy and 85. This is your NPR station, KUHF, Houston News 88.7, a service of the University of Houston. It's 12 o'clock.
Just ahead on this hour of Hello Houston, we continue diving in today's top stories, such as the House voting on a bill today to clarify Texas' near-total abortion ban. I'm Frank Billingsley.
And I'm Celestia Sherman. We'll also talk with Dr. Tyler Varisco, University of Houston Assistant Professor of Pharmaceutical Health Outcomes and Policy, about President Trump's executive order to lower drug prices.
And I'm Ernie Manous. Plus, we'll learn about a polytechnic college that Sam Houston State University is launching and what it'll be teaching students.
And we want to hear from you, so give us a call at 713-440-8870. You can also shoot us a text at that same number or email us at talk@hellohouston.org and watch us on YouTube. Just go to houstonpublicmedia.org and click the big orange button.
Hello Houston is made possible in part by founding sponsors John Bradshaw and Kathy Sanders, and by gifts from listeners like you.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. President Trump is hosting South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. A short time ago, when remarks turned to a Q&A with reporters at the White House, Trump was asked why he granted refugee status to a group of white South Africans, while the U.S. revoked the protected status of Afghans, Venezuelans, and others.
We have many people that feel they're being persecuted, and they're coming to the United States. So we take from many locations if we feel there's persecution or genocide going on.
Trump's closest advisor, Elon Musk, who is in the room, has also been outspoken about alleged violence against white South African landowners. Musk is a South African native. However, South Africa's Ramaphosa and others have flatly denied Afrikaners are being targeted. He had said that the group that arrived in the U.S. last week does not fit the definition of a refugee. Members of the Freedom Caucus who've been demanding deeper spending cuts in Trump's budget bill are expected at the White House today. NPR's Deirdre Walsh reports the GOP leadership struggled to garner enough votes to get the legislation passed, including Trump's tax cuts.
The tax cuts are really the central plank in the bill. The bill permanently extends the 2017 tax cuts that are going to expire at the end of December. It adds new tax breaks like no tips on overtime, and no tax on tips, things that Trump campaigned on. Those tax breaks expire in 4 years after Trump leaves office.
NPR's Deirdre Walsh. It's a challenging time for the nation's big retailers. Meanwhile, NPR's Scott Horsley reporting on the differing fortunes of two big chains.
Discount retailer Target reported disappointing sales and earnings for the most recent quarter and lowered its forecast for the full year. The chain's become a target for both sides in the culture wars, prompting boycotts. Like other retailers, Target's also wrestling with the rising cost of tariffs. The home improvement chain Lowe's had slightly better news for investors, with profits that outpaced low expectations. Lowe's sales dropped during the quarter, but not as much as had been feared. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
The EU says it'll review its political and economic agreement with Israel over what it calls a catastrophic situation in Gaza. Here's NPR's Rob Schmitz.
The EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, said the aid Israel has allowed into Gaza is welcomed, but she called it, quote, a drop in the ocean. She says Israel must allow more aid to immediately enter Gaza without obstruction and at a level that is needed. For more than 11 weeks, Israel has blocked aid from entering the Gaza Strip before allowing a small amount in the past few days. The UN warned this week of imminent mass starvation, saying 14,000 babies in Gaza are at risk of dying in the next 2 days. Kallas says because of this, the EU will review the 25-year-old EU-Israel Association Agreement, which oversees both political dialogue and the free exchange of goods.
It's NPR News.
Live from News 88.7 in Houston, I'm Gabrielle Dawkins. The founder of the Texas Renaissance Festival was found dead. Grimes County Sheriff confirmed that George Cullum, known as King George to many longtime festival goers, was found by a housekeeper this morning. He's had back-and-forth legal challenges facing the sale of the Renaissance Festival. And 2 cases brought by former Harris County DA Kim Ogg have hit a roadblock. News 88.7's Kyle McClinigan says most of the charges have been dropped against 2 people accused of assaulting a man on a Houston freeway as part of an unsubstantiated voter fraud conspiracy.
In October 2020, an HVAC repairman was allegedly run off the road and detained at gunpoint by former Harris County Police Captain Mark Aguirre. Aguirre was allegedly searching for thousands of fake ballots, but only found equipment and tools. Aguirre was a private investigator allegedly hired by GOP megadonor Steve Hotez to look for voter fraud in Harris County ahead of the 2020 election. Hotez was charged with 2 felonies in 2022 and 2 more in 2024. On Tuesday, Harris County DA Sean Tier announced that all the charges against Hotez were dropped. Aguirre had also been charged with 5 felonies, but Tier said all but 2 of the charges will be dropped. Aguirre is still facing 1 count of aggravated assault with a firearm and 1 count of unlawful restraint. In a statement, Tier blamed Ogg for bringing the charges without sufficient evidence. Ogg did not immediately respond to a request for comment. I'm Kyle McClinigan, News 88.7.
Houston's Chief Financial Officer, Controller Chris Hollins, disagrees with Mayor John Whitmire's administration on the size of the budget deficit in the next fiscal year. His deficit projection for the 2026 fiscal year is $27 million higher than the mayor's office.
In fiscal year 2025, we had the largest deficit in the city's history. That is projected to be $213 million. What we're projecting for this coming year will be the second largest deficit in the city's history, projected to be $134 million.
It's 85 degrees, mostly sunny. I'm Gabrielle Dawkins, News 88.7.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Progressive Insurance, where drivers can compare direct rates using Progressive's rate comparison tool. Customers can see options and rates side by side. More at progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE.
From Houston Public Media and News 88.7, it's Hello Houston, an open forum on today's biggest stories affecting Houston and beyond. Call now, 713-440-8870, or let us know your thoughts on today's topics by emailing us at talk@hellohouston.org. And now here's your host for Hello Houston, Ernie Manous, Celestia Sherman, and Frank Billingsley.
Well, that was a fascinating conversation.
Dr.
He is a
Hotez,
treasure. A treasure.
I can sit and listen to that guy for hours, and it's always so informative because he's not coming at it from any kind of, believe it or not, political bent. He is there following science.
He's
But
smart.
unfortunately, Ernie, there are a lot of people that have, wrung his name through the mud and question our health care just in general. And this is a real concern for a lot of people.
We were at an event together, and he had to have security to go to the event. This was about a year and a half ago or so, because things had gotten so tense because people are so angry about information. And all this man wants to do is take science and educate you about the science. Make up your own decisions after you've heard it from him, but don't go after the messenger. He is just following stats, science, information, medical knowledge.
You know, when I was a news reporter here at Houston Public Media, we were coming out of COVID, and it was already in 2022, 23, and there was a rise in another rise in younger children's, what you consider like your back to school vaccines, of people opting out their kids of vaccines. And I remember during that time in legislation, what I found so interesting was that the verbiage used by anti-vaxxers was the same verbiage that was used for pro-lifers. So they took, I want autonomy over my body. I don't want the government telling me what I can do and what I can't do. And they literally took pro-choice verbiage and moved it to anti-vaccine movement.
And if that is their position on
Pro-choice.
anti-vaxxers, then they should be against this FDA regulation that's telling
And
you
that's
you
what she
can't
was saying.
get things.
You can't. We're
You know?
not going to allow you to
Right.
have that.
Be free to do it. And I also want to say, though, folks that we classified as anti-vaxxers, they also care about their health and their concerns. And our job here is to share with all members of the community the science and the information we have. Make your own choices, but listen to both sides of the argument. Understand what's at play so that you make the right medical choices for you and your family. And there's evidence to support vaccines do help. I mean, I'm not going to get into it. I did it for 3.5 years every
That's
day.
right, but we do have some nice comments.
I know.
Frank, do you want to read some of those?
Look at Cosme Garcia.
What does
Ernie.
it say?
Congrats, Ernie.
Congrats, Ernie.
Alex Garza, she says, Ernie, congratulations. You deserve an NPR tote bag. Thankful to have you.
For those of you who weren't with us from the beginning, today is my 29th anniversary at Houston Public Media, and I do believe that's why I deserve an NPR tote bag, as I understand it.
I want a tote bag.
Well, be here 28 and a half more years, and you'll
You
get
got
one. I want to remind everyone you can watch us on YouTube so you can see how much I've changed in 29 years. Go to our YouTube channel. You can follow the show along there. And also, there's good comments that happen in that. A whole other show seems to be going on there with our viewers. And also, always give us a call or text us, 713-440-8870. Anything more on the weather for us?
Only that it looks like the better chance of rain over the next several is going to be on Memorial Day.
Okay.
So just make a plan B. It doesn't mean it's going to rain you out, but if you are an outdoor Memorial Day celebrator, have a plan B, which maybe just go to the garage with the hot dogs. It could be that simple.
Okay, there's your plan B. Moving along, Celeste, with the topics of the day, where do we begin this hour?
The first flight of self-deporting immigrants took off from Houston. According to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, more than 60 immigrants quote-unquote self-deported from Houston on Monday as part of the Trump administration's latest immigration enforcement program, which offers free flights to undocumented immigrants and a $1,000 stipend. The Trump administration said this was the first flight as part of the DHS's Project Homecoming, which was announced in March. The charter flight carrying 64 people took off Monday morning, taking 38 to Honduras, 26 to Colombia. To participate in the voluntary removal program, immigrants must request to be flown to their home country through the government's cell phone application, CBP Home. Are you in favor of the self-deportation of immigrants? Do you think these immigrants will get a fair shot at coming back legally? And should we be paying for airfare and $1,000? Give us a call, 713-440-8870.
You know, this one kind of fascinates me, and I had a different view of it until I spoke with someone who said, in some cases that $1,000 can be life-changing. And if they're going to be deported anyway with the movements that are happening in this country, take the money, go early, get back to where you came from, and start again. I can understand why some people would choose that. I don't like the program because I don't like the environment in which it's happening.
I think part of the reason they would choose it is Honduras and Colombia are pretty friendly countries. Mm-hmm. I don't think they would choose to go necessarily to Venezuela. Mm-hmm. I think it has a lot to do with the country. It'll be interesting to see how many people from where they came are willing to go back. I mean, Mexico's a very friendly country. If they choose to go back there, they probably, with their $1,000, might actually have, a much better life. That could almost be a half year's salary for some of them.
Right. Yeah.
So that might be a difference. Now, it's probably cheaper, $1,000, than to use our resources to track people down and detain them and deport them after hopefully due process, which we've talked about many times. So that might be it. Do I think they will get a fair shot at coming back legally? No, I don't. I think it's a trick.
I guess my thought on this is somewhat like what Ernie was saying, is that if you look at all the ways and the things that are happening, you hear about children being taken from their mothers or people just disappearing. This at least is putting some control back into people's hands. It's giving them money to go back. It is allowing them to do this on their own accord and
with their family
in a very humane way. And
is
wherever
it the best of a bad situation?
It's the best of the bad situation. And the way I see it is This is a way, again, in a very humane way. And that people are people no matter where they come from.
Interesting, this was never thought of before, or was it? I'd never heard of this idea of self-deportation.
Well, I think also that what can't be left out of the conversation is why people come here originally. And it's not just, in most cases, not just, hey, let's go try out the U.S.
Right.
There are reasons that they go through. And for many, it is an ordeal. And they travel so far and they work so hard to get into the country, however they get in. It's not just one day they decided to let's go to the U.S.
And I think there's also a major misconception that once they get here, they're just, living off of everything and everything. It is not easy. And we can go down that path. There is a lot
Your
there.
thoughts on this? Give us a call, 713-440-8870. You may also want to call on this next story. I have a feeling we're going to get a lot of thoughts on this one. So please, 713-440-8870.
By the way, Mitt Romney originally had the self-deportation idea during his campaign, and he was laughed at.
Well, it's funny how depends on who says it and how they react to it these days. Okay, my story.
Yes.
Ooh, this is an interesting one. A pregnant woman in Georgia who was declared brain dead after a medical emergency has been on life support for 3 months to let the fetus inside her grow enough to be delivered, a move her family says a hospital told them was required under the state's strict anti-abortion law. With her due date still more than 3 months away, it could be one of the longest such pregnancies. Her family is upset that Georgia law that restricts abortion once cardiac activity is detected doesn't allow relatives to have a say in whether a pregnant woman is kept on life support. Georgia's so-called heartbeat law is among the abortion statutes that have been put in place in many states since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade 3 years ago. So much to unpack in this story. What are your thoughts? Share with us right now, 713-440-8870. I had a very strong one-way opinion about this in that this is an outrage. This is insane. And I started to think a little differently over last night, thinking that we were going to talk about this story in the fact that, and I'm not making a choice on, I'm just looking at a different angle of the story, is that if this woman is, for all intents and purposes, gone, except they're keeping her alive.
No, brain dead is dead.
So they are keeping, but they're keeping the body alive.
Her body's like an incubator for the baby.
It's hard for terminating.
You're right.
Yeah.
If, in fact, this fetus can come to fruition and be born, what harm is it harm is it doing to the woman's body?
None.
Well,
and so
there are a couple of things at play
This is just
here.
where my mind's going, trying to see both sides of this.
April Newkirk, who is Adriana Smith's mother, said it best. She said, "My grandson may be blind, may not be able to walk. We don't know if he'll live once she has him."
Right.
So she said that last week on the news, and she said, "I am not saying we would have chosen to terminate her pregnancy. What I am saying is we should have had a choice." And I think that's where it falls, is people want to be able to make life decisions for their loved ones.
Absolutely.
This is, to me, less about pro-choice, pro-life, abortion, not abortion. This, to me, is strictly you have a mother whose daughter is there and her grandson. She's just that decision alone. I feel for her. And to me, the fact that the government has taken people's autonomy away from making decisions for their family.
Absolutely.
That is the problem here.
Well, and Adriana Smith, as you said, she was an emergency room nurse at Emory Hospital, which is where she went. She presented in the emergency room with headaches, and they gave her medicine, sent her home. She wakes up in the middle of the night and can't breathe. Her boyfriend calls 911. She goes back with blood clots on the brain, falls into this coma. She ends up dead. The boyfriend, she has a 7-year-old son already. I don't know if the boyfriend is that boy's father or not, but now you're going to have the 7-year-old who doesn't have his mother already. Already the family is going to have that kinship fostering issue going on. And the mother has put out a GoFundMe for a hopeful raise of $275,000. So, we're going to keep her alive so that the fetus can be born. But I don't know how we're going to pay for it. That's the family's problem. And yet, to your point, Celeste, family doesn't have a say in this.
It has no
Do
say.
we know if the woman who has got the fetus in her, did she have a health directive?
Adriana. I did not read that
but
she did. I don't know.
So I'm
do
just
think
curious.
this goes back to maternal health is also a major, especially within African American women. Harris County has one of the worst maternal health mortality rates in the country. And again, why was she sent home? Why are we not listening to women when they're saying, hey, something's not right here? In the state of Georgia, I think there's a lot of debate over what they're calling personhood. And so in this case of Adriana Smith, what they're saying is Emory, the hospital, may be interpreting Georgia law in a way where they're looking at fetal personhood is the idea that embryos and fetuses are people and have legal rights. So residents can claim a fetus as a dependent on state taxes. So basically they're saying we can't, family can't make decisions because the fetus, the baby inside of her,
is a human being.
And has rights to and has the right to live.
I think that part's probably true. I mean, I have friends who had in vitro done, and they had viable eggs.
Yeah.
2 of them produced 2 wonderful children. There were 4 left.
I have embryos. We went through IVF, and I have embryos.
Well, this couple, I'm not asking you a personal question,
Sure.
but this couple felt like they had to give those 4 embryos a chance.
Yeah.
And so they didn't want more children. They were happy with their situation, but they felt like these are children, and we have to give them an opportunity to be born. They unfortunately they miscarried, but they did give it a try.
Yeah,
and that's a family question.
It's a family conversation.
And look, could this become an issue where we have some embryos here that we don't want? Perhaps we could sell them to somebody who does.
I think there's a lot and there have been actually. And now we're kind of veering off a little bit, but within that embryo conversation, Frank, there have been times where a couple has gone through IVF. They've gone. And Sofia Vergara had a very public situation where she broke up from her partner, and he said, those embryos are mine.
Well,
I should have them.
So they become property.
No, they became and it was a thing.
I also think if we step back out and look at the case we were originally talking about, it's the ambiguity in the laws and who's writing them. We even talked about this in our first hour. Statements are made without the thought into what the ramifications of the words they're saying and what they mean are. And so you find yourself in situations where things like this story can happen, where they're keeping this woman alive on life support, basically, just to foster this fetus through to fruition. And it's just these terms we're making, once again, I go back to it, there's elected officials should not be making these decisions. They don't know
to women.
The nuance of what
women
they're saying.
Speak up. So many times I've heard it's just a headache. It's just cramps. Whatever. No, people need to listen to women.
I want to go back to an earlier story we were talking about the deportations, the self-deporting with $1,000. We had a YouTube comment that came in from Bill Spear. He said, "I hope the self-deportees don't get targeted by people who know they got $1,000." We also got another comment. Deal Hunter, I'm not sure I want to read your comment on the air. First of all, he calls me Bernie, so we're a little off there. Bernie, I Googled your name 5 years ago just to put a face to the voice I enjoyed hearing. I have to admit, you've changed a lot from the pictures shared online from your 30s.
Wah, wah.
Well, I like the fact that he said 5 years ago I was in my 30s. So for that, Deal Hunter, I will accept it.
And you can see how Ernie looks right now by going to our YouTube channel.
Yes. I could shave and get a haircut. I agree with you on that. Okay, let's go to the phone. 713-440-8870. Catherine from Clear Lake is online. Catherine, what's on your mind?
Hi. I was just commenting on the fact that I don't know whose money is being used to send people here, there, and everywhere, deport people through ICE. And when people get picked up with ICE, are they allowed to call somebody to speak on their behalf, or do they have absolutely no rights at all? Like, how did that guy get sent off to some other place that he didn't belong when he was here actually legally? And I would much rather that the money being used to let people go home if they're going to help them, get back to where they're from, like you said, and give them a fresh start with a little bit of money. That was my comment.
Thank you very much for that, Catherine. I know this topic keeps bringing up a lot of conversation. We plan to have another guest on in the coming week to talk more about immigration and what the policies mean, and even maybe we can find out exactly where the money comes from, who's budgeting for this. It seems like there's been an awful lot spent recently without any kind of movement in the budget for it, so it'll be interesting to see how that all works out, too. Thank you very much for your call.
Okay. Bernie, are we going to wrap?
Bernie, we going to wrap?
Yeah, Bernie says you should wrap. Ernie, on the other hand, wants to just keep talking all day long as I slowly age before your eyes.
Coming up on Hello Houston, we will talk to University of Houston Assistant Professor of Pharmaceutical Health Outcomes and Policy, Dr. Tyler Varisco, about President Trump's executive order to lower drug prices. And we continue to take your calls on today's topics at 713-440-8870. This is Hello Houston on News 88.7.
A healthy democracy depends on people like you having access to clear, trustworthy news. That's how you can make informed choices about your future.
Houston Public Media's reporting gives you the facts without the noise, so you can make decisions with confidence.
But we can't do that without your support. Stand up for your right to information.
Support the reporting that you count on at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate or call 888-909-0887.
This week on This American Life, Bowen thinks a huge part of who he is can be traced back to a moment before he was even born, when his dad met this guy named Dave at the Oklahoma City airport. So, one day, Bowen calls Dave.
I would just urge you that if you do write this, that's honoring to your mom and dad. You don't want the devil jumping on them.
The devil he knows, and the devil he doesn't, this week.
You can hear This American Life. It's coming up Wednesday night at 9 p.m. You can also hear that Saturdays at 11 a.m.
Support comes from Houston Grand Opera, opening the 25-26 season with Porgy and Bess, featuring music by George Gershwin, blending jazz, blues, and spirituals. Select dates available now at hgo.org.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from Smart Financial Center in Sugar Land, presenting Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons with the Last Encores Tour, returning in concert Friday, May 23rd to Smart Financial Center. Tickets at smartfinancialcenter.net. Support comes from UT Austin's McCombs School of Business, offering the Weekend MBA at Houston. Classes held in person on alternating weekends. Group chat with admissions May 23rd. Registration available at texasmba.com. Make it Support for Houston Public Media comes from Upreach Learning, presenting a summer academic boot camp for high school students to prepare for core STEM classes or the SAT exam. Camps begin June 2nd. Registration info at upreachlearning.org.
And now back to Hello Houston. To comment on any of today's topics, call 713-440-8870 or email us at talk@hellohouston.org. Now back to Ernie Manous, Celeste Diaz Sherman, and Frank Billingsley.
Earlier this month, President Trump signed an executive order that proposed cutting the prices of pharmaceutical drugs. The executive order says that within 30 days, the administration would communicate desired target prices for pharmaceuticals to drug makers, and that it would seek to ensure that Americans pay no more for prescription drugs than the lowest price paid by other developed nations. But how would this executive order take shape? And how could the pharmaceutical industry be affected? To discuss, we welcome Dr. Tyler Varisco. He is an assistant professor of pharmaceutical health outcomes and policy at the University of Houston. Dr. Varisco, thank you so much for joining us on Hello Houston.
Thank you very much for having me.
So why don't we just begin with, healthcare as a free market good? Let's just open it up like that.
Yeah, so a lot of the progress proposed by this executive order seems to sort of
spring from the fact that we can sort of as consumers demand certain pricing for the goods that we purchase. And that's really not how a free market works, in that, we can't just demand a price as consumers and then expect the producers to meet that price. But at the same time, medication and healthcare in general has never been a free market. A free market demands that everybody, the buyer and the seller, understands how the good is priced. And we really have no idea as general healthcare consumers of how healthcare is priced. And I'll tell you, as somebody who's worked in healthcare for a really long time, I don't even understand how healthcare is priced.
It's
right?
crazy.
It's very, very confusing. And medications in particular are particularly confusing in that when you Google the price of a drug and you go to the GoodRx website, or you even find a price that's in Redbook or one of the other federal pricing sources, that's rarely the price that pharmacies and other components of the health system are paying for that medication. And this comes back to a really complicated system of rebates on pharmaceutical prices. So about 50 cents of every dollar we spend on medication goes to a prescription benefit manager, a middleman, essentially. And some of that 50 cents also goes to a pharmaceutical wholesaler. And so what do manufacturers do? They raise the list price of drugs, both in the U.S. market and abroad, because they know that what they're going to have to pay to those middlemen to get their product on those formularies is going to be reflected in the price that's ultimately listed. So pharmaceutical manufacturers often list higher prices than are actually paid by the insurance companies, by the health systems, and by the pharmacies as well. And so we really don't have a good finger on the pulse of drug pricing in this country as it is.
Being the negative Nancy at this table on this whole
Sure.
thing. So I hear the president make his announcement, and all this is going to be great for lowering drug prices. But if I listen between the lines, it could also be interpreted, and tell me where I'm wrong here, that actually what we would do is raise the prices overseas. It's not necessarily bring us down, make theirs more expensive, and then we're all paying the same again. Am I looking at this wrong?
I'm going to be the more negative Nancy here.
Oh, even more. Join me.
I would go ahead and give you a fun statistic. About 70% of pharmaceutical profits come from the U.S. market across the industry. If I were a pharmaceutical company right now and I had to choose between staying in the U.S. market and continuing to profit from the U.S. market and pulling out of a foreign market that is using an antiquated or value-based pricing structure, I would pull out of the foreign market. I would just abandon those foreign markets altogether to maintain my footprint in the U.S., to remove that comparative perspective and just say, look, we don't sell in that market. This is what the drug costs.
So not only could it keep our prices the same or higher, it could take away service to other countries.
I agree, yes.
So I have a question. Let's say you have drug A on the market, but then there's drug B and C and D you're trying to develop that's costing billions of dollars that might not ever get into the marketplace. Somebody's got to pay for that development, and that's you and me.
Yeah.
So I understand that's kind of fair.
So we are.
Is it though?
Well,
if companies, and I'll let the actual guest
Is
answer.
it though?
And you can call me Friendly Frank. I don't know what we call Celeste.
If companies, though, weren't making billions in profit, I would agree with you, because then they'd be
let the good doctor speak to this.
Speak.
So it's this is a really complicated argument, and it's an argument that comes from the pharma playbook. And I'm not I'm not a pharma apologist by any means. My research is not supported by the industry, and really, I historically have been probably more critical on profitability in the pharmaceutical manufacturer space. But that being said, you are correct that we feel in the U.S. as if we must pay for the price of innovation. And that is reflected to some extent. We do get to benefit from a lot of new products that come to market, particularly in cancer care and in other more cutting-edge areas of innovation. And this would certainly impact the impetus of pharmaceutical manufacturers to continue innovating in that space. I'm not going to argue with that at all. But where I think the risk here is that, yes, they stop producing new drugs, or they find new ways to shoulder that risk or try to defer development internationally to other developed countries. And if that were to happen, pricing would still be reflected in the U.S. because, again, we're benchmarking development costs against other countries. So I could see this spinning toward less investment in U.S. biotech and more investment in biotech overseas and more investment in research overseas as well.
We're speaking with Dr. Tyler Varisco, an assistant professor of pharmaceutical health outcomes and policy at the University of Houston. You can join the conversation at 713-440-8870. We did have a YouTube question here from Chris Galvan, Dr. Varisco. He says, what should one consider before using services like GoodRx? For example, buying drugs using GoodRx might not count towards a deductible.
That is a very good point. Yeah. So purchasing medication using GoodRx would not count for towards a deductible. That being said, in a lot of pharmacies in the United States, the pharmacy itself is not really making a lot of money from your insurance company. Reimbursement has fallen dramatically over the last several years since we've really brought a lot of the pharmaceutical benefit managers into the market space. And because of that, a lot of community pharmacies are oftentimes losing money on medications that are reimbursed through prescription insurance, particularly generic or maintenance medications. Sometimes it's worth asking that pharmacy what the plain cash price would be for that medication, because it may actually be cheaper than the price that's listed on GoodRx or even lower than your copay. So it's always worth asking if it's, a generic medication that you're using for a chronic condition.
Let me stay with GoodRx for a moment here, and that kind of whole programs that are out there. It's not just GoodRx. So I look at a particular drug, and I know with my insurance at where I regularly go, it's this much. But if I don't use my insurance or use my insurance and I go somewhere else, it's drastically less in the U.S. How does this all work? Isn't there a cost for the medication that they are selling to the pharmacies? And the pharmacies put whatever markup. But I doubt these markups are either $1 here or $53 there. Why the inconsistencies?
That's a great question. The pharmaceutical supply chain is very, very complicated. So I'm just going to start off by saying that. But in short, the way that we price drugs on the U.S. is very, very fragmented, in where one pharmacy may pay a certain amount for one medication, another pharmacy may pay a slightly different amount for that same medication, and then each insurance company is working with a sort of a middleman, a pharmaceutical benefit manager, who also sort of provides pricing or reimbursement to that pharmacy based on what they've negotiated with the insurance plan on the other end. So because of all of those steps, each pharmacy can have slightly different prices because of where they're purchasing.
Slightly, though.
Very different prices.
Massively different.
Very different prices based on where they're purchasing their drugs from. Their purchasing power as a pharmacy. So a small pharmacy has less purchasing power than a large pharmacy. Different wholesalers are acquiring from different manufacturers at different prices. And then the PBMs, the pharmaceutical benefit managers, have their own pricing models and their own negotiations with the manufacturers. And a lot of their pricing with the manufacturer is based on the system of rebates, where they say, we will prefer the drug that you manufacture for this disease or this indication. And in exchange, you will pay us a rebate at the end of the year based on how much volume of that medication we are able to dispense to our beneficiaries. Well, so that has a lot of impact on pricing.
And will you address the fact that I guess some doctors are encouraged to prescribe certain medicines by those representing those medicines?
Yeah, and if you want me to make a moral judgment on that, I don't think it's the best model in the world, right? But at the end of the day, how are we supposed to communicate what's new, right? Your average small town family doctor, right? Or your average general surgeon, maybe not in the medical center, but in a non-academic setting. How do they know what's new?
Well, if it's a legitimate recommendation, great.
Right.
But if it's, we're going to have a conference in Hawaii to talk about this, and we want to invite you out there to learn more about our drug.
But
that's
even
different.
worse than that, you prescribe our drug and you get a kickback of so much.
Okay, that was where I was going. But
well,
sorry,
so marketing has changed, and the things that you're describing are not necessarily legal anymore. And now they do happen in some form. Pharmaceutical companies can still host educational events or contribute to medical conferences, right? And that is a form of advertising. But pharmaceutical companies are a business, and businesses do need to advertise. I'm, again, not an apologist, but let me add one more thing onto that. The bigger concern to me is direct-to-consumer advertising. We are one of two countries in the world where pharmaceutical companies can advertise directly to patients who then find out about all sorts of things that they think they may need. I mean, you can't watch a football game without seeing 10 commercials for Ozempic anymore, right? that is driving up demand for these products, these very expensive products. And what do patients do? They walk into their doctor's office, they demand that drug. The insurance company is now having to pay for that because the doctor has prescribed it, right? And now we're driving up prices because, again, the demand is there, and that demand is generated by advertising.
How do you feel about Eli Lilly coming in and saying, we've created this demand so high we can't fill it, and so compound pharmacies are filling it, and now they're saying, okay, we can fill it now. You compound pharmacies that are doing it for half price need to stop.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point. I am a proud former independent pharmacist, and compounding pharmacies do have
Thank
a very
you for your work.
Sure. Still very proud to work with the National Community Pharmacists Association on a lot of the work that we do here. But regardless, there needs to be something in between there, right? Like just putting the kibosh on compounding when patients really can't obtain these medications, that is an issue. I mean, and some of that goes back to, again, having providers check expectations at the door. Let's try a diet, let's try some exercise, let's try some health lifestyle modifications, and then we can talk about one of these drugs. Let's get some guidance, some evidence-based guidance from the Endocrinology Society, from other organizations to sort of weigh in on this issue before making it a regulatory and manufacturer problem. So I don't know if I totally agree with suspending compounding of these agents, but one thing I will say is that there have been instances of patients being harmed because there is such a rush to provide these products from these med spas and other outlets that a lot of the time the education is not there, the quality control is not there, and then patients are giving themselves very large doses because they're not taught how to inject semaglutide or other products, and there is risk there. And so I'm okay with compounding, but at the same time, we have to be cautious with how new drugs are rolled out, and it can't always be the patient demanding a drug. And there has to be a healthcare professional and evidence.
Speaking of new products coming out, if I remember correctly, it was 3 years after you release it into the marketplace that then a generic can be formulated. Does that still exist? Am I off on my years?
Yeah, so the number of years is it varies, I will say, and I think if I remember correctly, patent exclusivity is something like 9 to 11 years. That being said, there's a ton of tools in the pharma toolbox to keep a drug brand for a very long time.
One molecule.
Yeah, so slight modifications, change to the salt or something. There's also been a lot of instances, particularly with some of these newer biologic drugs, of the manufacturer challenging the fidelity of the biosimilar product to their product. And so there are a lot of extensive regulatory requirements there for some of our more expensive biologic drugs. But even for oral medications, pharmaceutical companies can come in and say, look, that generic, it doesn't dissolve at the same rate. It's not absorbed at the same rate. So it's not identical. And that causes the FDA to suspend that generic from reaching the market. The other new thing, too, a lot of manufacturers will change route of administration. Look at some of the semaglutide products. Oh, you've heard of the injectable. Now we have an oral, right? And so we've got Rybelsus. We've got these other products on the market that are the same molecule, formulated differently to be taken differently, and that, again, extends the exclusivity of the original manufacturer.
So, Dr. Varisco, speaking of the executive order that was proposed by President Trump about cutting the prices of pharmaceutical drugs, what do you think people should know and be aware of about this executive order and what they can expect?
To be entirely honest with you,
Always.
I think what the average American healthcare consumer should expect is absolutely nothing for a long time. I don't think that implementing this order is practical. I expect there to be months, if not years, of legal challenges from the pharmaceutical industry. There's language in there about direct-to-consumer purchase of medications from the manufacturer. I can't think of a single state in the U.S. where that is legal.
Well, and to your point, I think it's politically based.
It is.
I'm going to tell the pharmacies to cut those prices, the drug manufacturers to cut those prices. If we're going to demand that, then the government should pay for it.
So you bring up a really good point. Why are drugs so much cheaper in other countries than they are in the U.S.? Because I don't think we've really addressed that. The way to lower pharmaceutical prices most effectively is to increase the buying power of a population. If I'm the UK and we have a single payer, and I'm not necessarily advocating for single payers, but if I have a single payer, then, we've got one entity that can bargain with the manufacturer for a lower price for that drug product.
For lack of a better term, socialized medicine.
That is a word that people use. Yeah. So,
single payer gets confusing. The single payer is socialized medicine.
That means the government buys it.
Right. But then you've got countries like Germany, right, where we don't necessarily have a single payer. We have private health plans, but they're very regulated. They all generally pay for care at about the same price. And because of that, again, there's more unified bargaining across the insurance space. So if the insurance companies are all kind of on the same page instead of all trying to compete with each other for lower pricing and better rebates, then we can kind of move in mass to negotiate those prices down.
Which is better for pharmaceutical companies, single payer or double, triple payer, or what we're doing in America right now?
I think what probably works out better for pharmaceutical companies, and certainly if not pharmaceutical companies, for prescription benefit managers, who I think are a big source of the problem here, what works out better is a very fragmented system.
Which is what we have.
Where we have confidentiality agreements in place and we can keep payers blinded to the negotiation activity of each other. And because of that, we can sort of work out a deal that works out optimally for us as the manufacturer and works out well for the payer, keeping prices relatively high.
Now, something I'm seeing here on our YouTube comments is somebody says, now that Medicare has been allowed to negotiate on some drugs, should we see the prices come down for everyone? Dr. Varisco, how will this and is this at all going to affect Medicaid and Medicare?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So the Medicare, I'm going to address that first. So we're talking about negotiation through the Inflation Reduction Act program, which would allow CMS to negotiate the prices of, I believe, 10 drugs a year and to expand that tranche every year to a new tranche of drugs, rather. I think that the IRA model is quite sensible in that it's not this big sweeping cut. And one thing about the Trump administration is we seem to want to, fix the problem with one executive order and just assume that that's going to work out. But the IRA negotiation is pulsed, where we're going to do 10 drugs a year, allowing the manufacturers, allowing the insurance plans that manage those Medicare beneficiaries to sort of adjust gradually to that change in pricing. That's a very sensible approach. And one giant cut is likely to just introduce dramatic disarray, dramatic legal challenges, everything that we've seen unfold so far. I'm particularly concerned about the executive order for favored nation pricing, in that almost simultaneously we're seeing massive restructuring to Medicaid plans, where we're instituting work requirements. We seem to be restricting services, restricting activities under the expansion from the ACA. We're really reframing federal investment in Medicaid. Mm-hmm. And I almost think that there's going to be this argument that, look, we're trying to reduce drug prices. That should lower Medicaid spending. And so we can make these cuts to Medicaid because they will be offset by the reductions in drug pricing from this other executive order. I don't think that's how insurance plans work. And I generally expect to see Medicaid benefits deteriorate in terms of quality of care that is paid for and delivered.
Dr. Tyler Varisco is an assistant professor of pharmaceutical health outcomes and policy at the University of Houston. Dr. Varisco, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for the intelligence.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
now we're going to go to artificial intelligence.
Coming up on Hello Houston, we talk about new artificial intelligence. Cat's out of the bag. Classes at Sam Houston State. Stay with us.
Tonight on Houston Public Media TV 8, the new series, Bugs That Rule the World, a 4-part global investigation into insect declines, exploring their diversity and critical roles on the planet. Tonight at 9 on TV 8, or stream on the PBS app.
Support comes from GiveMeTheVIN.com. Purchasing vehicles in minutes with the VIN or license plate, or by bringing the vehicle to Houston area offices. Details at GiveMeTheVIN.com. Houston Public Media is a service of the University of Houston and is supported with your gifts to the Houston Public Media Foundation. More information available online at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate.
Support comes from Rice University's Baker Institute, where you can hear world leaders from presidents to prime ministers right here in Houston, with access to conversations on issues affecting the world. More at bakerinstitute.org/membership.
Support comes from Signify Business Cash by Wells Fargo. With this business credit card, cardholders can earn rewards on business purchases with no caps or categories to track. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/signify. Terms apply.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from Medical Bridges, where 95% of all support goes directly to humanitarian efforts. Since 1997, they've helped strengthen healthcare around the globe. More at medicalbridges.org.
Support comes from the Houston Symphony, performing Schumann's Second Symphony under music director Yuri Valchua. Plus, pianist Bruce Liu performs Chopin's First Piano Concerto, May 23rd through 25th at Jones Hall. Tickets at houstonsymphony.org. Support comes from Gen Pro, a Houston-based home generator service providing power to homes during unexpected outages, helping with connectivity and productivity. More information is available at genpro.com.
And now back to Hello Houston. To comment on any of today's topics, call 713-440-8870 or email us at talk@hellohouston.org. And now here's Ernie Manous, Celestia Sherman, and Frank Billingsley.
Welcome back. Our last segment of the hour. We're on Hump Wednesday.
That's right.
I know, Hump Day. All right, so recently Sam Houston State University announced the launch of Sam Poly. That's a polytechnic college designed to equip students with industry-driven skills and workforce-ready training. Sam Poly will feature a program called Practical AI and Intelligent Automation, which was crafted to help prepare students for high-demand careers like AI technician and automatic specialist, and it was built with direct input from industry leaders. So joining us now to tell us more about this is Jacob Chandler. Jacob is Associate Vice President for the Division of Strategic Enrollment and Innovation at Sam Houston State University. Jacob, welcome to Hello Houston.
Thank you so much. We're happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. You know, I had a friend say, AI won't take away your job. The person who understands AI will take away your job. And that's kind of the truth, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Thank you for that. One of the things that we're seeing so much in the industry is that AI is seeping into everything that we do. When it first came about, and AI has really been around for the last probably 30 years or more, but what we've seen in the last couple of years is really the advent of generative AI, and now we're thinking about agents and how agents can augment the work that we do, and so much of that is critical as people start to think about how it will affect their jobs. And I think back into the 80s and 90s when computers and the internet first came around, that adjusted how we worked and when we worked and the tools that we used every day. And you didn't have just someone who was a word processing specialist or a typist in a field. It became part of what everyone did. And I think what we're seeing now with AI is that AI will seep into little bits of everything that we're doing, to the point that it's going to require that we all elevate our skill set and have a bit more knowledge about AI and the proper ways to use it, the impacts that it can have on our careers, and also the improper ways to use it as well.
Well, can you give me sort of the fifth grade explanation of what AI is? I mean, everyone says AI, but I mean, it can be as complicated or uncomplicated. So give me the uncomplicated definition.
Sure. Yeah. So artificial intelligence is really deals with training computers how to, and I'm going to kind of use air quotes, how to think about how to solve problems.
Right. Like if the problem is a hurricane's in the Gulf, AI can be used using all the data of the past to say, oh, it's coming to Houston. While the forecasters are saying, no, it's going to go to Florida. And then the AI comes in and says, no, you're not looking at the things I'm looking at, and I'm smarter than you. It's going to Houston. Correct?
Yeah, it could, yes. And so it can really help with analyzing large sets of data, doing more predictive modeling, and to do it faster than what a human can do, which is really powerful, because if the more notice you can give, especially in your example of weather, the more notice you can give to someone to say, hey, it's time to evacuate, or you need to think about sheltering, or whatever your suggestion is. That having more data, more accurate data, becomes really, really important for being better at your job, whatever your job happens to be.
Right.
So, Jacob, what will students be learning in this program? Because I remember growing up for a long time, everything was about coding. There was a time where everybody wanted to learn how to code and make websites and learn how to do that. When we're looking at, practical AI and intelligent automation program, what type of classes will students be taking?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that, as we started to survey the industry, one of the things that we started to see is that there were so many universities who were focused in on how do we enhance the computer side of AI? How do we get really technical? How do we build new predictive models? How do we build new generative AI models? Very, very technical things. But what we saw is that there weren't a lot of universities who were focused in on how do we equip everybody else to be better consumers of AI information and to leverage that to complete their work. And so this practical AI and intelligent automation are really intended to focus in on that. How can the consumer use AI in their work in a lot of different ways across a lot of different industries? So they will learn about machine learning. They will learn about artificial intelligence. They will learn about proper usage of artificial intelligence. One of the things that we think is fun to talk about is artificial intelligence can hallucinate. So you have to know when to say, I don't know that I believe that what artificial intelligence is telling me today. And so in these programs, people will learn how to, not necessarily how to build those things themselves, from a very technical standpoint, but really how to use the tools that are provided by companies like ChatGPT and OpenAI, by Microsoft.
Kind of like
Copilot program.
Sounds kind of like a statistics course where we can teach you how to survey and do statistics, but you also have to know how to interpret the data you get from it.
Yes, a lot of similarities there. You asked the question about coding earlier, and so you can liken this also to, we're not teaching you how to code, but we are teaching you how to use a computer.
Yeah.
It's that sort of difference. We want you to know how to use these tools and to use them well in your job.
If I'm not mistaken, you do have one of the courses is AI ethics and society. And so if there is this issue, how should we be looking at AI ethically and its impact on society?
Sure. Yeah. So there are so many ways that, once we have a tool like artificial intelligence, it's easy to, I don't know if you all have used, some of the generative AI tools that have come about, whether those are Copilot or ChatGPT or Claude. There are a lot of great tools in the industry, but one of the things that we need to think about is, what are we asking AI to do for us? Are we asking it to completely do our jobs? I think in some ways it's not quite ready for that, but it can help us do some things. So one of the things, let me give you a couple of concrete examples if I can. We've talked with a few people who say, I use AI to help us write job descriptions. Mm-hmm. Well, that's an interesting thing. So if I say, well, what should a computer technician do? Or help me develop a job description for an HR professional. Well, it can tell me a lot of skill sets and features and capabilities that a person should have in that role. But I still need to go through with that and with a critical eye say, is this really right for that position? Is it right for my industry? Is it right for my company? And so part of that is about being a good consumer of AI, about ethics, about how we're applying those tools to the work that we do. So those kinds of courses will really help in that way.
It's a brave new world
it
out
is
there.
Absolutely.
Hopefully we'll continue this conversation another time. Thanks for being here.
Yes. Jacob Chandler is the Associate Vice President for the Division of Strategic Enrollment and Innovation at Sam Houston State University. Jacob, thanks again for joining us on Hello Houston.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, look at this. Look at this text we got, Ernie.
Oh, Lord.
Why don't you read it?
Okay, I'll read it. In December, this is from Nancy Christopherson. Nancy Christopherson. In December, I'll have made my 29th anniversary of moving from, of all places, Chicago, just like Ernie. I've been listening and watching NPR PBS since the late 70s, early 80s, so I guess it's possible. I've been an Ernie fan since his very first days at WBEZ and or WTTW. Could that be 40 or more years?
Oh, my God.
No, it
Oh my
couldn't
gosh,
be because I
Ernie.
wasn't at TTW. Time does fly. Wishing you another 29 years at public television, and also keep up the good work. Any chance of resurrecting Interviews series? That was from Nancy. And yes, we are resurrecting Interviews, and it will be a podcast. Our first one will be coming up in a couple of weeks right here on Hello Houston.
Look at that. Ernie has a fan.
A fan. Thank you to my fan.
Yes, Frank and I will be back on Tuesday. Ernie's going to be taking out the rest of the week.
Taking it out?
Taking us all the way to the end of the week.
God
And that
help
brings
us.
us to the end of our show. We want to thank you for listening, watching, commenting to Hello Houston. We'll be back tomorrow with more conversations. This is News 88.7.
Thanks for listening to Hello Houston. Join us every Monday through Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. to talk all things Houston. The Hello Houston production team includes Garrett Bowman, William Menjivar, Jen Altai, Todd Holslander, and Jim Kovacic. For the latest in local news, subscribe to the Hello Houston daily newsletter at houstonpublicmedia.org. Hello Houston is a production of Houston Public Media. The opinions expressed by the guests of this program are solely their own and do not represent the views of management, staff, or underwriters of Houston Public Media. This is News 88.7.
Donations come in many forms: a monthly membership, a one-time gift, and that extra vehicle you no longer need. We take any kind of vehicle in any condition. Learn more at houstonpublicmedia.org/cars. And thank you.
I'm James Kamarasamy. You hear BBC NewsHour throughout the week, but news breaks at the weekend too.
The state media has announced a martial law.
We found a group of families who just walked through the bush to safety.
This is a very scary moment for a lot of young people.
Nobody was quite sure where this had come from. Stay connected. Count on NewsHour from the BBC.
BBC NewsHour Weekend, Saturdays and Sundays at 3 p.m. on News 88.7.
Mostly sunny today. We'll get up to around 89. Mostly cloudy tonight, a low near 72. 86, this is your NPR station, KUHF, Houston. News 88.7, a service of the University of Houston.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. In an extraordinary scene in the Oval Office today, President Trump sprang a video on his White House guest, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, in